Okay, picture this. It's right around the year 600 BCE. We're standing on this rocky peninsula on the coast of what is now Turkey, in the ancient city of Miletus. And a man just looks out at the world and asks, what is everything actually made of? Notice, he didn't ask, what do the gods want? He asked, what is everything actually made of? Now, spoiler alert, his specific answer was wrong, but just the sheer act of asking that question, in that exact way, out loud, in public, without invoking a single deity, that right there is literally the birth of Western philosophy. So, welcome back to The Explainer. If you joined us for our previous map of the philosophical branches and eras, you know exactly where we're heading today. We're walking straight into the first major era, the ancient classical period. We're talking about a 1,000-year foundation of Western thought, stretching from roughly 600 BCE all the way to 500 CE. Almost every single big idea you'll ever encounter in philosophy gets its roots planted right in this window. It's going to be an incredible journey.
Here's the chain of thought we'll be following today. 1. The Pre-Socratics. 2. Socrates. 3. Plato. 4. Aristotle. And 5. The Hellenistic and Roman schools.
So let's dive right in. Section 1, the Pre-Socratics, explaining nature with nature. I mean, just think about the sheer energy and wonder of these early thinkers. They had absolutely no laboratories, no microscopes, no telescopes. They had nothing but their own eyes and their capacity for a good argument. And they shared one major obsession, which was finding the single underlying stuff that makes up the entire universe. Thales, our guy from Miletus, said it was water. Then Anaximenes came along and said, no, it's air. Then you've got Pythagoras, and yes, I mean the triangle guy, who argued that the deepest reality isn't physical stuff at all, but rather mathematical relationships. Like, numbers are literally what the universe is made of. And then there's Democritus. He proposed that everything is built from these tiny, indivisible particles that he called atoms. Actually, scratch that. Democritus hit the nail on the head. It just took us, about 2,400 years of scientific advancement to finally prove he was right. But what's really wild is the stark contrast between two specific pre-Socratic thinkers. Heraclitus looked at the world and said, hey, everything is constant change. His metaphor was fire or a flowing river. He famously said you can never step in the same river twice, because by the second step, the water's moved, and honestly, so have you. But his rival, Parmenides, looked at the exact same universe and concluded the total opposite. He said change is just an illusion. Reality is basically like a frozen statue. It's one, it's unchanging, and it's eternal. And the craziest part? 2,500 years later, modern quantum physicists are still arguing over which of these two perspectives is actually closer to the truth. All right, moving on to section 2. Socrates, the question machine. Okay, so here is where the focus of philosophy shifts entirely. We're zooming away from the physical nature of the universe, and we're looking directly at human morality. Suddenly, down in Athens, you've got this barefoot guy just bothering people in the marketplace. Socrates wrote absolutely nothing down. He just talked. And his whole thing was the Socratic method, basically asking relentless questions to expose a total lack of underlying knowledge. Let's say you claim to know what justice is. Socrates would go, okay, let's see. A soldier disobeys direct orders to save a child's life. Is that justice or injustice? And he would just go on, question after question, until the so-called expert was forced to admit they actually had no clue what they were talking about. And that brilliantly illustrates his core philosophy, perfectly captured in his most famous quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Socrates firmly believed that real wisdom begins the exact moment you admit how little you actually know. For him, virtue was a kind of knowledge. Like, if you truly, deeply understand what is good, you'll just naturally do what is good. But as you might guess, the experts in Athens did not particularly enjoy being publicly humiliated in the marketplace. So in 399 BCE, the city actually puts Socrates on trial and sentences him to death, claiming he was corrupting the youth. He drank the executioner's poison completely calmly, still arguing and teaching right up to his very last breath. He became philosophy's first true martyr, and man, this traumatic event permanently altered the course of Western thought. Which brings us to section 3, Plato. The world of forms and the cave. Plato was Socrates' absolute star student, and he was completely traumatized by his teacher's execution. I mean, think about it. If a civilized city can legally kill its wisest man, what does justice even mean? To process this, Plato came up with the theory of forms. He argued that the physical world we see around us isn't the real world at all. It's just a shadow. Behind it lies this higher realm of perfect, unchanging concepts. Perfect justice, perfect beauty, perfect truth. So the justice or beauty we see here on Earth, they're just flawed, imperfect copies of those true, higher forms.
This all builds into his most famous metaphor, the allegory of the cave. Let's walk through it. Step 1. Imagine prisoners chained inside a dark cave since birth, watching shadows dance on a wall, absolutely convinced those shadows are reality. Step 2. One prisoner escapes, walks outside, and sees the actual sun and the real world for the very first time. He finally gets the truth. Step 3. He goes back down into the cave to tell his friends, but they don't believe him. They reject him. And in some versions of the story, they even kill him. Now, looking at step 3, it is incredibly clear that Plato is writing a direct parallel to the fate of his teacher, Socrates.
So to prevent a tragedy like that from ever happening again, Plato wrote The Republic, which most consider the very first serious book of political philosophy. His core idea? An ideal city shouldn't be ruled by the rich or the strong, but by philosopher kings. We're talking about leaders trained from childhood to love wisdom and truth way more than they love power. It's a fascinating concept, and honestly, 2,000 years later, we are still passionately debating whether this idea is beautifully utopian or incredibly dangerous.
Next up, Section 4, Aristotle, Logic, Virtue, and the Good Life.
So Aristotle was Plato's star student, but he was a total rebel. He profoundly respected his teacher, but he disagreed with him on almost everything important. If you look at famous classical paintings of these two, you'll usually see Plato pointing up, toward the heavens, toward those abstract forms, right? But you'll see Aristotle pointing straight forward. Aristotle argued that reality isn't hiding in some invisible higher dimension. Reality is right here, literally right in front of us. We just need to study it. Because of this intense focus on the observable world, Aristotle started dissecting animals, classifying different types of governments, and he literally invented formal logic, which, by the way, is the step-by-step system of valid argumentation that modern computer science still totally depends on today. When Aristotle asked what actually makes a good human life, his answer was super practical. He called it eudaimonia, which translates to human flourishing. And how exactly do you achieve this flourishing? By practicing virtue until it just becomes a habit. Aristotle said you don't become brave by just sitting around thinking about the form of bravery or by being magically gifted with it at birth. You become brave by repeatedly doing brave things. Your character is built through action. It's not just handed to you. And Aristotle's incredibly grounded logical framework didn't just stay put in Athens. He actually got a job as a private tutor to a Macedonian teenager named Alexander. That teenager grew up to be Alexander the Great, who went on to conquer the known world and physically carried these Greek philosophical ideas all the way to India, spreading this exact way of thinking all across the globe. And finally, Section 5, the Hellenistic and Roman schools. Philosophy gets practical. After Alexander, the Greek world expanded into this massive empire, which eventually got swallowed up by the even larger and often super chaotic Roman Empire. In that kind of turbulent environment, people really needed a survival guide just for everyday life. So 3 distinct paths emerged. First, you've got the Stoics, thinkers like Zeno, Epictetus, and the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Their rule was simple. Focus only on what you can actually control, accept what you can't, and train your mind like it's a muscle. Next, the Epicureans, founded by Epicurus. Now, they didn't preach wild partying. They actually argued that the best life is a quiet one, filled with simple pleasures, good friends, and totally letting go of the fear of death. Finally, the Skeptics. They believed that absolute certainty is just pure arrogance, and that true peace comes from suspending your judgment, and just admitting that, hey, you don't know everything. Through massive Roman figures like Cicero and Seneca, these highly practical schools quietly shaped the entire foundation of Western civilization as we know it. All right, 30-second recap. Ancient philosophy in 90 words. Let's do this. We've covered 1,000 years of brilliant minds, so let's do a rapid-fire sprint to lock it all in. The Pre-Socratics kicked us off by trying to explain nature using only nature, no gods required. Then Socrates completely flipped the script, making relentless questioning itself the method for uncovering truth. Plato reacted to his teacher's death by arguing that true reality is deeper than what we see, living up in a perfect realm of forms. Aristotle rebelled against that, pulled philosophy right back down to the observable earth, and handed us formal logic and habit-based virtue ethics. And finally, the Hellenistic and Roman schools, the Stoics, Epicureans, and Skeptics, took all of this theory and turned it into incredibly practical life advice for surviving a turbulent empire. Boom! That is the entire ancient classical chain of thought solidified. But as we know, empires don't last forever, do they? In 476 CE, Rome falls. Europe goes quiet. But philosophy? Philosophy definitely doesn't die. It just escapes the collapsing empire and moves into quiet monasteries and into the vibrant, flourishing libraries of Baghdad and Cordoba. And as it moves into this brand new era, it runs into a monumental new question. Can faith and reason actually live in the same mind? What exactly happens when ancient logic collides with the rise of global religions? I want you to really think about that for a moment. We are going to uncover the answer in our next explainer on the medieval era. I'll see you there.